Okay, guys, so we get this question all the time of what hotkeys you're using and how do you set them up. And if you're a newer player to the game or you just haven't used a ton of hotkeys before, it can be a little daunting to get started. So I'm going to quickly go through some of the hotkeys that I use. And I'm going to start off by saying hotkeys are very personal to each player. So you're not going to find two players that agree on hotkeys, but there's some general hotkeys, that I use that will probably be useful for everyone. So let's jump into the game here. And Best Boy Faramir in the chat here on Twitch is saying, hello, YouTube. So there you go. Oh, I got it on the screen. Okay, you can see it. Anyway, so I'm just going to kind of click through the hotkeys I use here first, and then we can go into the menu and get a little more specific here. So starting off, I like to have my town center set to the back mouse button. I use forward mouse for push to talk a lot of times, but I recommend have this somewhere that's really close for you. So I think the backwards mouse button really helps me get to that town center. So I can be out here looking around, hit back mouse, and here we are at our town center. So to queue, and I use the grid layout for all of my buildings, units, etc. So if you think of like the grid of your keyboard, with the top row Q, W, E, R represents the top row of this. A, S, D, F is going to represent this middle, etc. Now on forward. Now some of these end up having conflicts, which is okay, but the main ones you use are going to be right here in these first two rows. So for me, I'll press back mouse and then Q for training my villagers. So back Q, you just want to get really used to doing that all the time. And when I play Ottomans, one game, I accidentally spawn Minutemen. So that's what I use for my town center. For my idle villagers, I use the space bar because you never want to have idle villagers. So it's really important to be able to easily get to your villagers. So space bar is the biggest button on your keyboard, really easy to get to. Some other just kind of generic hotkeys I'm using here. I use a tab for getting to my Explorer. Now, some people like to set him in maybe a hotkey on the number row. I used to use tilde, but I'll tell you a little more about that in specific later. But yeah, I use tab to get to my Explorer because you want to be able to find him out on the battlefield. And with that, you don't really need to put him in any control groups as far as your main army because he has his own button assigned to him. I use, we got a shipment now, so I'm going to use F1 for getting to my home city. So F1 will jump me in and out of my home city. I'm just kind of go through them as I think about it. As far as attack move goes, I use Z, so I'll select my unit, press Z, and then left click. So that's how I use attack move because Z's pinky, pretty easy to hit on the keyboard. So Z is what I use for my attack move. Use it at your own risk. If you know, you know. Now, with that being said, using Z, I have recently noticed it's a conflict with my melee mode for my units or whatever ends up being down here. So I've considered changing it, but I always decide just to click down here. But maybe. I know some players like to use, I think, Alt. So that could be something you can decide, probably a little more personal. But Z is just what I've used for a long time. And then as far as some of my buildings, I'm going to need to build some things here. What I will do, let me get to the next stage here. There we go. And we're going to get up to the next. There we go. Now we're going to get to the next stage. Okay. And let's build a war hut. And this is kind of a unique civ I've picked here. Before it goes crazy. What I will do, now you can set your barracks and your stables and your artillery foundry and all that to like have assigned hotkeys. I don't like to do that, particularly with switching through a lot of civs a lot. And also sometimes I only want to select like my barracks that's at the front line, right? And I don't want to just select all of them. So for that case, I put them in their own control group manually. So what I will do is I always put my war hut or my barracks in control group 4. Now, if you're not familiar with using control groups, I'll use hold shift and then press a number, so 4. And you can see there, it's blocking it with my sub bar, but Trust me, 4 right here is our war hut. So now I can press it. Now it doesn't snap to the building. So I could stay in battle, be microing my troops, and then I can press 4, and then QWE to queue my units up with this grid layout. And I think if you're new to hotkeys, use the grid layout. I think it just makes it's so intuitive just to think of like it matches up with the grid on your computer. And I can double tap 4 to jump to my war hut. Another extremely important hotkey. This is probably one of the more like recent hotkeys I added to my group. And it also could be a dangerous one if you use it inappropriately. I use caps lock to select all of the same unit type. For instance, if I press villager, if I click one villager, and say I want to select all my villagers, which this is actually probably the worst thing you want to do most of the times. This is one I accidentally do. You hit caps lock, and it will select every villager on the map. So this is really useful for if you've got units out on the map, you've trained, you always have new units jumping out of your barracks, and you're in the battle, you can select like one musketeer, hit caps lock, you then have all of your musketeers on the map selected, and you can hold shift and put them in the control group you want to use. So that is the really useful thing about select all. I also use it for my town centers because my back mouse will just cycle through one town center where what I'll do is I'll hit back mouse to select a town center, hit caps lock, which will then select if I have multiple town centers, and then hit Q, and I can queue up, all of those town centers without having to like jump through each of them, one at a time. So select all is extremely useful. It takes a little bit of practice, so play around with it in skirmish first. So I'll show you an example of like, okay, I got this one unit up here. So I'm going to select one of him. I'm going to hit caps lock, and now it selects all 5. And now I can put them in shift 1, and now I have them in a control group. Now, as far as what control groups do I use when I'm fighting, I typically use control groups 1, 2, and 3. I don't use any more. It gets pretty hard to use more than 3 control groups. Now, some players do, and great if you can. I've got 4 and 5 set to my war hut, and then 5 is typically my stable, or sometimes maybe my artillery foundry. I might even make artillery foundry 6. I might do 4, 5, and 6 might be my military production. But I try to keep the exact same control groups every game, so you're not trying to like remember mid-game like which control group did I put my cav on. Like for instance, I'll always put my infantry on range infantry on control group 2. I'll put my hand cav on control group 1, and I'll often, if I'm playing Lakota, put my war clubs on control group 3. And I might vary it around. And I've even recently been experimenting with not overdoing it on control groups. I think sometimes you can try to put too many things in control groups when you're actually almost better off if you have the micro to just click and drag some of your less used units. But again, that's going to be a very personal thing. Now, another I think this is kind of a hack that somebody told me is, and I'm going to fumble around in the menu trying to find this for you guys. Let's see. I think it's here. Yes. Okay. So this is selection group hotkeys. You can rebind, so select group 9, right, is typically the number 9. And let's be honest, I'm not reaching my hand across the keyboard and pressing the number 9. So what I've done is I rebound 9 to be selected by my tilde key. So what that means, I can do shift tilde, and it will put them in group 9, but that's right there on the left side of my keyboard. So I can use tilde 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I've used that sum for like putting my cannons there sometimes if I need that extra control group. Kind of depends. So if you are going to go the 4 control group route, I would highly recommend giving this a try. Rebind 9 to be the tilde, the key, and it's in the top left corner of your keyboard if you're not sure where I'm talking about. Which way I'm pointing. And then let's see some other ones I use. I use C for my community plaza. If you're playing any of the native civs, you've got to have that bound, because when you're in a fight, you want to be able to easily press C, queue up that attack dance, and then jump back to your battle with your other hotkeys. So I use C for my community plaza. Then you've got your grid. So definitely make sure you bind that, because you might be switching from attack dance if you're playing Lakota to siege dance to maybe experience. It's something you want to have bound. For the market, I use B. Now these things are kind of like individual things I've bound, but for the market I use B, which is a pretty easy thing to get to. For garrisoning and ungarrisoning from a town center, I use G. So I think with that, those are a majority of the hotkeys that I'm using. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I use. I think that's pretty much it. Now, another small one. I did rotate camera. I use the numpad 1 and 2. Now, some people might not have a numpad. I don't use this feature a whole lot, but it is something you can do. It kind of messes with me if I rotate it the wrong way, but every once in a while there's a case where it helps out. I know some players like to always like position themselves so that's like north-south. Their enemy is like north on the mini-map. So it's going to be kind of a personal preference. The game was kind of meant to see from this angle, so it looks kind of weird to me sometimes. And then we can zoom in with the mouse wheel. And then the last one, when you're placing a building, let's see. So if I'm going to place this war hut, I can hold shift and rotate my mouse wheel to rotate the building. And I can't remember if this was something I custom bound or not. So just take a look through the menu. I'm not going to waste time scrolling through there because it takes me forever every time I go into that menu. It takes a while to find these things. But it can be really useful, particularly positioning your town like to be defensive. I really like to rotate like my capital. Oh, thank you for the sub, Caplicious. Here we go. And on that note, I think that's going to close out our hotkey guide. So hope you enjoyed. And if you want to see other crazy effects on stream, you can join us over on twitch.tv/FitzBro. Thanks, guys.